So, hey everybody, this is Dan.
This is Ron.
This is Nominee Questionable Movies, and today we're doing something especially questionable. We're looking at TV. We just watched 3 episodes of The Simpsons. We went back and forth and kind of said, what is your favorite episode? I think I remembered a few more of them specifically than Ron did, but I definitely had a lot of laughs tonight.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, but it was great for starting off. We both independently came up with the Monorail episode as the best one to watch.
Yeah, and so I guess should we go over the 3 episodes we watched?
Yeah. You're going to describe the plot?
Yeah, okay, unless you want to take that.
No.
Well, okay, I should probably take that, yeah, because as longtime listeners of the show know, Ron is not necessarily awake for everything that we watch.
Yeah.
It's okay because I can't sleep, so it evens out.
Thankfully, I've seen each of these episodes at least 3 or 4 times each.
Oh yeah, I've probably seen these like a dozen. I mean, I watched so much Simpsons when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
And I think going back to it here in the context of like having to talk about it on the show brought a lot of stuff into focus for me that we can go into a little bit after I lay out what the hell we're even talking about in this episode. So, first episode we watched, absolute classic, written by Conan O'Brien, featuring Phil Hartman, season 4's Marge versus the Monorail. Then we did the one that Ron remembered, Last Exit to Springfield, a later season 4 episode. Season 4 may well be the best overall season the show ever did. And then we watched season 8's A Milhouse Divided, which is my other favorite. And yeah, it's been too long. I haven't watched The Simpsons in way too long.
Wait, the second episode, Last Exit to Springfield? I picked that?
Well, you said you remembered the one where they go on strike, and then we were looking for it.
No, Steel Mill.
Oh, I'm not sure which one's the steel mill.
They see the steel work. They go to a place, and it even at the end, it thanks the Steel Workers of America. But what's his name? Homer wants to show Bart like how to be a manly man or something like that.
Oh, Homer's Phobia, the one where John Waters has a guest appearance.
That sounds
where he's like, where Homer's really afraid that Bart's going to turn out to be gay.
Yeah.
I think that's season 8. I can't remember. Oh, okay. I don't know why my brain translated steel mill to strike.
Steel strike.
I do remember you saying steel mill. But anyway, we'll have to watch that the next roundup.
Yeah, there we go.
I don't remember that being one of the stronger episodes, but it did get an Emmy.
That episode got an Emmy?
That episode got an Emmy because it was one of the first TV episodes that was kind of dealing with homophobia directly.
Oh, okay.
Which,
remember the scene in the steel mill where at 5 o'clock the whistle blows or whatever, and then it turns into a big dance party.
Yeah, that's definitely that episode. Yeah, and I think like the reasons I don't remember it as one of the stronger ones is just for plot reasons. Like at the beginning of the episode, Homer turns out to be like super homophobic when we haven't really seen any indication of that in like 7 years.
Okay.
I should rewatch it though, because I mean, I feel like they were on fire for like 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I guess should we talk about them in order?
Yeah. So we've got Marge versus the Monorail is the first one.
So Marge versus the Monorail. What did you find different this time? Or did you notice anything different?
Yeah. So when I first saw this, I don't think I knew the Music Man, the music, and the main character of the Music Man, Harold Hill. And so here we had something like, I don't know, what was it, Leonard Liney or something like that?
Oh, Lansley, it's some double L name, yeah.
Double L. So instead of
Lyle Landley.
Lyle Landley. So we've got the double L instead of the double H, and he sells them on a bill of goods. He sells them on a monorail that's garbage. Now I know, and now I really noticed that his character in the musical number is sort of like a more amoral version of Harold Hill. But the musical number feels a little bit like it would fit in the Music Man.
Yeah, I think that's definitely what they're referencing with like his outfit and everything.
Yeah.
And I bet if we went back to the Music Man, there's probably even some of the choreography in there. And I think that leads to a thing I noticed, which is when I was, I probably saw most of these as reruns when I was like 10 or 11 for the first time. And I did not recognize 95% of like the references, or that they even were references at that point. And I think going back to it now that I'm older, I can spot that stuff. And I think that speaks to how strong the jokes are, that like it can work even if you don't know what they're referencing.
Right. That character, Lance Liney, that was
Lyle Landley.
Lyle Landley. Okay, I wasn't even close. Lyle Landley. Yeah, he's funny on his own, even if you don't know that reference. Kind of stands out as this like old timey salesman, just kind of out of place. Which if you knew the reference, he's still just some guy out of place that doesn't belong there.
Right. And we have like one of those great Simpsons kind of opening bumpers. Like a thing I remember a lot about the Simpsons when I was younger is that they have like, eventually you get to an A plot. And in the case of Marge versus the Monorail, there kind of is just an A plot, but there's always some kind of weird detour you have to take in the beginning to get there.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's a full parody of the Flintstones intro.
Oh, right. I already forgot about that.
Yeah, I totally forgot that was in this episode. Like, I remember the what is it? That line, like, he's about to crash into a chestnut tree. Yeah. I remember that, but I forgot it was part of that episode. And there's definitely gags like that where, like, I don't remember the episode. I just remember the gag. Like, what? There's that one where Homer gets the 36-foot party sub, and he's like eating it for weeks over the course of this montage, and then they take him to the hospital, right? And I always forget what episode that's in, but yeah. So we have that, and then this guy shows up to town, and they catch Mr. Burns hiding radioactive waste inside trees. We get some really good sight gags, and Mr. Burns is brought to court, done up like Hannibal Lecter. He's ordered to pay $3 million. The town has a meeting about what to do with the $3 million, and that's how we end up with the monorail. And then Homer decides he wants to be a monorail conductor because of an ad he sees on TV.
Then he gets some really extensive training.
Yeah, he gets some really intensive training, and then they kind of figured out like literally the only believable way to make Homer a monorail conductor, which is that Lyle Landley looks at the class, he's ready to skip town, and he just points it wherever his finger goes.
Yeah, and Homer thinks it's him, and Lyle.
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. Phil Hartman. Oh my God, Phil Hartman is so good in this episode.
Yeah, definitely top form.
This might be his best thing on The Simpsons, maybe. And I mean, those Troy McClure bits. I mean, he did so much good stuff on The Simpsons. But anyway, so Homer becomes a conductor. Marge goes over to the previous town where they built the monorail. It is a post-apocalyptic hellscape. There's nothing left except for this broken monorail. And she meets the scientist who made the monorail. And then they talk to Homer because the monorail, like the brakes stop working, and it just starts going around in circles really quickly. And then Homer has to stop it with something. And so he takes like one of the letters off the side of the train and ties it to a lasso. There's just like a dude playing with a lasso in the train for whatever reason. And then and he manages to stop the train. And finally they get everybody out.
Yeah.
And then I think that's the end of the episode.
And did you mention Leonard Nimoy? Yeah,
and Leonard Nimoy is on the monorail as like the celebrity to kind of kick off the monorail opening. And so what is your relationship with this episode? Because like we definitely both thought of this immediately. Why do you think it was the first thing that came to mind?
Wow. Honestly, first of all, it just has this very simple but catchy name, Marge versus Monorail. So I even remember that much. Boy. Well, it has all these things, and it's got all these individual pieces that you described. And going all the way down to the celebrity guests, because once Simpsons became popular, celebrity guests would show up every so often. So it's even got that, and it's got a great one, and it's sort of the decision to have him is it's kind of random to have Leonard Nimoy, no reason on there. But he becomes the voice of authority, right?
And they give him so many great little subtle bits.
Yeah,
Um,
they really make good use of the celebrity appearance because often they'll just like they kind of pop up briefly and they're gone.
well, I feel like one of the major issues with modern era Simpsons is when they get the guest star, they build the episode around the guest star.
Uh-huh.
Whereas this, like, clearly they just had a script. They probably could have thrown whatever celebrity in there. They probably wrote the bits where Nimoy's talking after they figured out it was Leonard Nimoy.
Uh-huh.
Like, you could switch it to another celebrity, and this is still a very solid episode of television.
Right, right, right. It would come off differently, but it would still like
And the fact that the jokes are so specific to him, though, speaks to like, I think Simpsons, at least early Simpsons, had maybe the largest writers' room of any show ever.
really.
Like, have you ever seen a picture of that writers' room? There's like 30 people.
Wow.
In most TV sitcoms, you've got a writing staff of maybe like 8 or 10. So you can get in a lot of these gags, but also you have a lot of eyes going over the script. And the best that I understand it, the writer's room for the early Simpsons, it kind of worked where like somebody would write a rough draft and then everybody would just kind of riff jokes and they would take whatever worked.
Okay.
And that kind of, and on the one hand, that makes sense because there's a lot of funny lines in all those episodes, right? But it doesn't quite explain, because this is a very coherent piece of television. Like, it has a plot, it follows it in a very linear fashion to a conclusion. There's not even a B plot, unless maybe you consider Homer becoming a monorail conductor like the B plot, but it's not. I mean, it feels like it's just a plot, right?
Yeah, it's part of it's a bit of a adding some color to this because anybody could have been the monorail conductor and
Right. In The Simpsons, you have such a rich cast of characters that you can have just one plot and every character reacts to it.
made it Homer and just added all sorts of Homerisms to it.
Right.
But as part of the main plot, yeah, okay, I'd agree with you that there isn't really a B plot.
And the reason I love this episode so much is when I was running that table at Occupy Wall Street and I was trying to explain how, like, a lot of construction projects in cities that go to governments are graft. I tried explaining it in technical terms, but every time, as soon as I said, remember Marge versus the monorail, they'd get it.
Okay.
And I think, like, this is like the template for a South Park episode. Like, I think if any Simpsons episode, I mean, there's a few episodes that are also like this, like the gun control one they did later, or there's a few of them, but like every South Park episode, give or take, is about the madness of crowds, right? You have something happens, the community gets into some kind of crazy fervor, and then something goes horribly wrong, and that's Marge versus the monorail.
Yeah.
And I think another thing to point out is the script credit on this is Conan O'Brien.
Yeah, I noticed that.
And I can't remember. I believe this was the first script he submitted to them.
Really?
Yeah, which is like insane.
Yeah.
Even if it did get punched up, like it's just so solid. It's just a great episode of television. Yeah. Do you have any observations or?
No, I like what you pointed about the madness of crowds. And that is a great part. Oh, well, and it's part of the musical number, right? When they're all
right.
Monorail.
And it's such a catchy song too. Yeah.
You get to participate by just saying monorail.
And I think this episode also started at least a trend in the first two episodes, which I think was kind of like personally a little revelatory to me, because like I watched, as soon as I discovered The Simpsons, I was maybe like 8 or 9 when I first saw The Simpsons. I was obsessed. I would watch, they would show like 1 or 2 reruns a night on Fox. And I would just watch every single rerun they would do. So I saw most of these out of order originally.
Okay. Which is fine. The order doesn't matter that much.
the order really doesn't matter. Like seeing them in order kind of gives you a sense of like how the thing changed over time. But like I can't think of a single episode where it doesn't stand on its own up to at least like season 10. Is that and I was saying this to you when we were watching it, like the world of the Simpsons, there is no legitimate authority. There's not really anything that's reliable, right? Like when they get to the meeting, the mayor initially says that it's $2 million, not $3 million, until Lisa corrects him. Lyle Landley is not a legitimate source of authority for sure. Mayor or the Officer Wiggum and the mayor, like when the monorail thing's going on, they go to the town hall to look up like the statute that decides which one of them deals with it. While there's this giant emergency going on. And I can't think of that many other television shows that are that just like anti-authority, I guess. And like it's also covering a lot of subjects you don't fully understand as a kid. So I feel like The Simpsons had a pretty huge role in shaping how I understood a lot of this stuff. And that brings us into our next episode. Would you like to introduce it?
Sure. This episode is also for season 4. I forget what it's called. Oh, Last Exit to Springfield.
Right. A pun on the Last Exit to Brooklyn by Hubert Selby Jr., the guy who wrote Requiem for a Dream.
Oh.
I'm not entirely sure why it's named that, because Last Exit to Brooklyn is not about a labor strike, but it shows like they were making references to a lot of stuff. Like there's a lot of 2% jokes in these episodes, because like I don't think most of the audience is supposed to know that that's a Hubert Selby reference.
The 2%.
The Last Exit to the Springfield.
Oh yeah. It comes across as just it's a catchy title. Like we know it's a reference to something without even knowing that the title is Last Exit to Brooklyn. It just sounds like it's parodying something or it's referencing something. So it's already kind of amusing.
Yeah, and so I guess we'll go over the plot. So in this episode, you have, what is it? The union at the power plant. They're fighting over their new contract, and Lisa needs braces.
The reason for the fight is that Mr. Burns wants to take away the dental plan.
Right. And so we get this great scene of Lisa at the scariest dentist I've ever seen.
Yeah.
and let me introduce you to these tools so they are not scary to you. Here is the picker, and this one we call the gouger. It's just so many good lines in that. And anyway, so Homer goes to the union meeting, and the union has decided that they're willing to trade the dental plan for a keg of beer. And in the line to get some beer out of the keg, Homer realizes that if he accepts this, he has to pay for Lisa's braces. And so he goes up, and this is another thing that's, I think, South Park really took from The Simpsons. He goes up, he gives this really rousing speech, even though most of the time we see him on the show, he's not particularly eloquent.
No.
He's, Randy Marsh is the Homer Simpson of South Park, right? And convinces everybody in the power plant to go on strike. And so they go on strike. Mr. Burns, who owns the power plant, becomes convinced that Homer is some kind of tactical genius because Homer has to go to the bathroom when they have a meeting. And then Mr. Burns turns off the power, and then I forget how they went.
The strikers, the strikers continue to strike. It doesn't stop.
Right. And we get to see Lisa play some like Pete Seeger style music with her braces on. And
it was a pretty good song.
Yeah. That always got stuck in my head every time I've seen this episode.
Yeah, same.
And I think what's striking about this is the political sophistication of it, right? When Homer goes on the TV news show to debate Mr. Burns, Kent Brockman tries to ask Homer a question, and he's like, oh, wait, the studio says that I'm not supposed to talk to you. All right, Mr. Burns, what do you say? And I mean, I've known a fair number of like lefty guys who've been on television, and that's kind of how it works, is like, you don't want to agree to be on the television show because you're mostly being used as a prop, and they're not going to let you make your point. Unless you talk over them. That's what I did to Fred Dicker once, but I won't go into that. That's a long story.
Okay.
But well, I guess it's like it takes two to tango, right? So if you can be obnoxious enough to talk over them at the rate they talk over you, you might just win.
Are you not getting the support of the interviewer, the anchor person?
Yeah, they're not interviewing you in good faith. I guess is the way to put it. And that struck me as like, okay, that's very true. That's not a detail most other shows would get into. And also just like the fact that it's a pro-labor, like union-oriented television episode in the United States. Like, I can't think of any other TV episodes about a labor strike where the labor strike is highlighted. Like, there is like people go on strike in Arrested Development at a few points for like sight gags. But like, I don't know, can you think of another episode of television that's centered around a strike?
I'm making stuff up in my head, honestly.
Yeah, because like I'm reaching, but I'm drawing a blank. I can't think of another episode with another, like, even on South Park, they never did anything about like a labor strike.
Yeah,
that I remember.
But there's got to be like other sitcoms that have had that happen. But I imagine that they don't quite get what they wanted.
Well, and I feel like in a lot of sitcoms, like what they would do is you make the strike about something stupid, so you can make jokes about that and jokes about what's going on in the strike. And I think another thing that strikes me here is that in The Simpsons, it's a pretty down to earth reason. Like, he just wants dental insurance. They don't make a joke out of that. Like, well, I guess they do kind of make a joke out of that with like Lisa going to the dentist, but
Homer sincerely wants to get Lisa good braces.
Right. And I think that kind of underscores like the only things that the writers, or at least the text, seems to believe in. It doesn't believe in authority. It doesn't believe in any kind of wisdom inherent to society, but it does believe that there's a lot of importance in the fact these characters care about each other and their connection to each other. Like the thing that redeems everything, so that it doesn't just seem like it hates everything at the end of almost every episode, is the fact that Homer genuinely cares about Marge, or Bart genuinely cares about Lisa, or something like that, right? And I find that interesting, right? Because it's not a standard set of ethics for a television program. Or I guess like that part of it isn't that weird in a sitcom, right? Like you have the fight and then everybody makes up at the end of the episode. The fact that it's put in the forefront of all this kind of anti-authoritarian rhetoric. And in this episode, even just straight up like anti-capitalist stuff. And they still managed to make it funny. Another really good episode. Did you
mention that Homer becomes the labor boss?
Yeah. And Homer as the labor boss is
reluctant.
He's reluctant, yeah. And he I mean, the thing before they go on strike is this like really short sight gag about him punching Lenny in the back of the head, right? But yeah, so it's an interesting, of all the random jobs that Homer Simpson has had, this is one of the more unusual ones. Did you have any particular did you have any observations? Or
no, just his reluctance to be the president of the, or whatever, the head of the union,
right?
Because usually when he gets into some sort of scheme, he's 100% into it. He really wants something out of it.
You know, I hadn't thought about that. That is actually a really good point.
Yeah. Here he had he did have a specific goal. He was but it was basically like, okay, I'll do this because I want this thing that is going to help my daughter, and I'm not going to benefit from it.
And maybe that's why season 4 is the best season, because you have like the really early episodes, like season 1, before they kind of got in their groove. It's more like a traditional family sitcom. There's not a lot of these kind of wild sight gags that you would see in like Mad Magazine.
And Homer's working hard.
Yeah, and in season 4, they still have the remnants of that, but they're starting to do more of these crazy sight gags. and kind of non sequiturs. So you get the best of both worlds. Because I think another thing that kind of gets weaker as The Simpsons goes on is Homer becomes kind of more of this like almost Jerry Lewis figure. He's just sort of this like schmuck who can't seem to keep himself out of trouble. And he seems to become like increasingly dumber as the show goes on. And I mean, I'm not the first person to say that, right? That's like a pretty common complaint about The Simpsons.
Yeah, okay. No, I see that. Well, and he starts off, I made a comment about while we were just watching the intro. The intro was old, and Homer still seems in the intro, you still see the older angry Homer.
Right. He's Archie Bunker when the show starts, basically.
But then by season 4, he's more dumb than angry. And it's you don't get the you used to get in the in early on, he would choke Bart, and it was like, well, he would constantly be choking Bart. So they got rid of the domestic abuse.
Right. I mean, I think there's still some of that up to like season 3 that I remember, but by season 4, yeah, I think it's pretty much gone. Although we didn't watch any like Bart centered episodes today, but
That's true. That's true.
But yeah, like I think Homer Simpson's such a resonant character in at least the early seasons of The Simpsons, because he resembles what I think most people feel like on the inside. Like, you're not really quite sure what you're doing. You're trying to do the right thing. You're not really but like most of life seems to happen by like luck or coincidence.
When we're looking at the changes in the characters, and you described this as being a family sitcom, which it wasn't quite that for the first few seasons. I remember there was a big outcry. There was a culture war over The Simpsons.
Well, it wasn't like the Waltons, but it's structured sort of like Married with Children almost, except for Married with Children, you just kind of presume all the characters hate each other.
True.
And I think The Simpsons, like a shallow reading of The Simpsons, you could take that away, but that's not really what's going on.
Yeah, you Married with Children, there was also a big outcry, and there were calls to get it off the air. But I can't imagine, or I'm wondering if the series had started with season 4, I don't think it would have been as controversial.
Maybe, yeah. I'm not entirely sure on that. I know, like, I've watched my fair share of 80s sitcoms, and I've watched, like, because the other weird thing about The Simpsons is there was only one primetime sitcom between the Flintstones and The Simpsons. And it's this not very good show from the early 70s called Wait Till Father Comes Home. And yeah, just the whole idea of pitching a primetime. This is kind of the beginning.
You're talking about primetime cartoons specifically, right?
Primetime cartoons, and also like animation meant for adults that is not like based around underground comics, right? Like, you have Ralph Bakshi. What The Simpsons is doing, I think, is a lot different than what Ralph Bakshi's doing.
Yes.
And then a few years after The Simpsons start, you get the first episodes of like Space Ghost Coast to Coast. And then now, like, animation for adults, it's like a huge part of television.
Right.
Like, honestly, like half the sitcoms that come out are animated. And without The Simpsons, there's no Adult Swim, right? There's no
and there's no South Park.
There's no South Park. There's no Family Guy. There's no Archer. And it's because I read a lot of Matt Groening's Life in Hell comics too. When I think I ran into the comics before I ran into The Simpsons, which I think is an uncommon case.
Well, going by age,
given the age that I am, because I'm exactly the same age as The Simpsons.
Right. Whereas I remember the Matt Groening cartoons before The Simpsons, because I read them, originally, and then The Simpsons, it was cool. Like, oh, hey, it's the same guy. Oh, that's so neat.
Yeah, and I remember I was on a car trip with my parents. I think I was like 7 or 8 years old, and my dad sees this book called School is Hell. And he sees that it's got comics in it. And being my dad, this is the same dad who took Clockwork Orange out of the library for me when I was 12, because he remembered it being like a movie he saw in college, but he didn't remember anything else about the movie.
Oh, man.
I just didn't get it. I just seemed kind of boring at the time. But anyway, so he buys School is Hell. I'm trapped in this car. I think I had some like Tick comics and the School is Hell, which is just a collection from the Life in Hell strips about school.
Mm-hmm.
And on that car trip, because there was nothing, I probably read that book like 20 times.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can still recite parts of that book from memory. Like I just remember being straight. There's one part, what is it? He's talking about high school, and it's like, if you're so great at choosing jobs, why did you become a guidance counselor? And that has stuck with me for more than 20 years. There's one when he's talking about grad school, and it's what is it? It's like the grade school child's chant and the grad school child's chant.
Mm-hmm.
It's like school's out, teacher let the monkeys out. One went east, one went west, one went up the teacher's dress. And then the grad school chant is school's out, teacher let the monkeys out. One was jailed, one prevailed. Both asked God, how have I failed? And that just stuck with me for, and they're just very kind of like misanthropic. They're not comics that are about like playing nice or fitting in with society. And I think that rubbed off on me in a big way at that point in my life. Because you got to think, I'm kind of going from like Captain Underpants to School is Hell.
Yeah, that's quite a leap. How old were you?
7 or 8.
Oh wow, yeah, that was definitely not meant for you.
Yeah, and it blew my mind at the time, right? That might have been like the first kind of alternative comic I ever read.
Okay.
And I still have a copy of it to this day. It is in the other room.
Nice.
And I still look at, and a thing in his comics that carries over to the show, because like I know that a lot of the show is that they brought in these great writers. Matt Groening is an expert on character design.
Mm-hmm.
Like every character in the Simpsons, you could recognize as a silhouette with no features.
Okay.
And that's like why Andy Warhol would wear those sunglasses and the wig. Like he thought that he took that from comics. He was like, okay, if I'm not recognizable in silhouette, this picture can't be reproduced recognizably. And anyway, so and any last thoughts on last exit to Springfield?
Nope. I just think it's funny that it's not the episode that I was thinking of. When I mentioned, I said I was asking about the episode with the steelworkers. So you found an episode with a strike, which was a good episode. No, that's it.
Okay. And actually, you were watching these as they were airing in the 90s, right?
Yep.
Any particular memories of that? Like, did people get together, or was it just sort of like you would go to your room, or?
So when they first came out, they were shorts on the Tracy Ullman show, and Tracy Ullman show was big, and so we'd watch it as the whole family would watch it together. When the Simpsons came out, I was in college, so I was watching it in the common area. Or during the summer when I was home watching it in reruns. But yeah, so that would be on my own. But that was a lot of TV. So,
and do you remember like conversations or anything you had about it when it was coming out? Like,
I remember when there was an outcry over it when it first came out, not as the shorts, but when it came out as a full series, and some people wanted it off the air. And I remember I was volunteering somewhere with a friend of mine, and he got into a discussion with the person that ran the program about it. And my friend was the guy was saying he wouldn't watch it, or that it's a bad show because it teaches bad values.
Which is so weird because it feels so wholesome.
Yeah.
Certain ways watching it now.
But early on, Bart was more of a brat. Or not just a brat. He was a tiny bit evil. And Homer was angry and abusive. And I don't know how to describe Marge.
I mean, Marge is kind of like, I remember when I showed, because let's just call her my ex. My ex had never seen any of these because her parents kind of took the initial controversy at face value. And so she thought it was all just like trash television. And I just remember I was like stunned because I was like, because to me, I mean, the first 10 seasons that said it's like what the Bible was to somebody in the 19th century. It's like this collection of commonly known phrases and images and stuff that you can reference in conversation easily. And it's certainly it's I've I'm sure it has influenced my thinking in ways that I don't really fully comprehend. And watching it, she was just like, wow, Marge is stuck in such a sad marriage.
That's
And
true.
kinda, yeah. I mean, on the one hand, yeah, Marge is kind of like, somebody who has a hard time not being in a victim role. And they kind of go into that one episode where they parody Thelma and Louise. Marge on the Lam, I think is what it's called.
I don't remember it.
Okay, it's pretty much just like Thelma and Louise, but with Marge, and she makes like a friend. I want to say it's in like season 5.
Hey, I've never thought about that. Marge doesn't really have friends. Homer does.
Homer sort of has friends. I mean, I almost feel like there aren't a lot of close friends on the program. There's like Bart and Milhouse. And that's kind of it.
Homer has Barney, Lenny. He hangs out at the bar every night with
right.
Marge doesn't do that.
That's true. I mean, I guess Marge has like, I mean, at least in the last episode we watched, she was able to call like Mr. Hibbert and Kirk and Luann. Like it seemed like, or no, she does say at one point about Luann, like I know almost nothing about you. Yeah, so just, there aren't a lot of relationships on this show where I feel like, okay, these two people are a lot closer to each other than these other two people are, unless they're married. Like a lot of Homer's friends, they're just kind of like people around him. Like I don't get the sense that he's like confiding in Barney.
Okay.
Although on the other hand, I have a hard time imagining Homer Simpson like confiding in a person.
Just doing so, unless there's unless he's having some issue with Marge and the relationship. Like, would you say that he was confiding with folks in the last step? Well, actually, yeah, this leads to
yeah. Let's go into the last episode then, because I feel like this flowed a lot better than a lot of our other episodes we've done where we did multiple things.
Yeah.
Like we seem to naturally just get to the next one. So the next one, I don't know. For me, at least, I don't know if there is a funnier episode of The Simpsons than this. It's called A Milhouse Divided. Kirk and Luann Van Houten, parents of Milhouse, of Everything's Coming Up Milhouse fame, get divorced. And then Homer becomes afraid that he's going to lose Marge because of it. And I've probably seen this episode 10-15 times. And every time it doesn't get old because it's a very well observed script. I don't know if I think pretty much every joke that they make lands, and some of them are like all-time classics on the show.
Like what? I know that's a repeated joke. I'm just curious what you consider a classic.
All-time thing. Something that I have quoted in conversation multiple times. Can I borrow a feeling? I have sung that in conversation multiple times with people, and my sister and I just like, it's like shorthand. Like we can kind of talk in Simpsons references.
Yeah. So just for the audience, "Can You Borrow a Feeling" is a song that what's his name?
Kirk.
Kirk, and even he came up, he had a demo tape for it, and then in the end he tries to get Luann back and he sings the song, and the song is terrible, his performance is terrible. It's painful. And then it ends with him asking Luann to get back together, and she not just rebuffs, she just like, no.
And so there's other ones too, like the when Homer goes to visit Kirk and he's living in like his bachelor apartment.
Yeah.
And I always remember it as Kirk saying, "Hey, do you get to sleep in a race car?" But it's even worse in the episode. He says a racing car. Like, how much more of a dork can you sound like? And then Homer says, "No, I sleep in a big bed with my wife." And I would make that when I went through that breakup, I would make that joke to myself probably like once a week. And oh god, there's just so many. Maybe the funniest thing in it for me, like the single funniest moment, is Luann is screaming at Kirk because Kirk works at a biscuit factory that's owned by Luann's father, and she's saying how he like drove the biscuit company into the ground, and they're like in 11th place behind whatever it is in Allied Biscuit, which Allied Biscuit is just a really funny name for a cracker company, A. And then Marge starts sweeping all the crackers off the table back into an Allied Biscuit box so you can hide them. And I almost fell over this time because I remember that Allied Biscuit, I remember. There's just so many great parts of this episode. And yeah, so I guess we should go through like and actually give the quick plot summary.
Yeah.
So you want to do this one, or were you cognizant enough?
I'm trying to remember the opener, but the opener leads to Marge wants to have a dinner party.
Oh, they're all watching TV, and then Marge wants to have a conversation.
Oh, right. Nobody wants to have a conversation, and she ends up going into the into the dining room or whatever and having a conversation with herself.
Right, and then it ends with Homer saying, "Can you keep it down in there?"
Yeah.
And it's just so great. And like there's so many little subtle things, but the fact that Lisa sides with Homer on that, right? She's supposed to be like super intellectual in most other contexts of the show, but whenever they're watching television, she wants trash television just as bad as the rest of them. You have that classic gag where there's like Maggie, the dog, and the cat all look like they're gonna fight over this meatball, and then Homer picks it up off the floor with a fork and just eats it. I love that. But anyway, so Marge decides to have a dinner party,
and so they have. I think that there's like 4 couples that between them, and I remember. So I just remember the joke in which they're talking about this filmmaker named Woodsy Allen. That's what Marge calls him. She says she loves his movies except for this one, like the Nebbish character. She says,
yeah. She says I like it except for that one anxious fellow or something like that, and it's just such a great Marge line.
But it's also so out of character for them to have a dinner party,
right? And it's totally like I've been at dinner parties like that where like back when Woody Allen still had kind of currency as like, okay, I'm into art movies, let's talk about Woody. Like Woody Allen for a long time was kind of like the accessible version of art movies to a certain kind of person. And that certain kind of person would certainly be like a middle-aged person having a dinner party in 1994 or 1996, I think this would have been. And it's just so, and then Kirk and Luann Van Houten start fighting at the dinner table. And they're just like angry at each other, and they're insulting each other back and forth. And everybody at the dinner parties getting uncomfortable. They go to play charades, and Kirk draws. I don't even know what the fuck it is. Like it's just like an organic shape, I guess. And or is it charades or is it no? It's Pictionary. They're playing Pictionary, and she's like, I have no idea what the fuck this is because like I have no idea what the hell he drew on that thing. Like I can't tell if it's supposed to be like a really subtle gag or reference to something. But he's like, it's dignity, Luann, it's dignity. And then they decide to get divorced. And Marge and Homer go to bed. And Marge is wearing the most ridiculous nightcap I've ever seen. And, they talk about the divorce happening. And then Homer goes to visit Kirk. He sees how sad Kirk's life is. And then Kirk has this kind of moment of self-reflection. He says what he did wrong in the relationship. And then Homer kind of like says all these things, and then Homer starts thinking, wait, I've done all of these things in my relationship. And so he goes to Lisa and says like, oh, what was the exact line? It's like, I know you're 8 and I don't want to put a lot of pressure on you, but you have to save my marriage, which I love that line. And Lisa listens to him, and he's like, I have all these secrets from Marge, like my poker shack out in the woods. And then Lisa's like, she knows about that. And anyway, and then Homer gets like, he starts being super clingy with Marge, like he right, like she's trying to go back to sleep. And he's like, oh, let me calm you with some gentle ocean noises. And just Homer doing his version of like a white noise machine. It's just so funny. And then what is it? He like goes in when Marge is getting a haircut and finishes the haircut for the hairdresser, and Marge's hair just looks awful.
Yeah.
And she's just like, come on, leave me alone. Like, I'm a grown ass woman. I can take care of myself. And then he goes and he files for divorce. And we're like, oh shit. And I'm guessing that's when the commercial break happened, like right after he files for divorce.
Okay.
And then, and we think, oh shit, their marriage is over. Or I mean, you don't really think that because you've seen like the sitcom reset a million times at that point, but it seems like there's some real stakes. And then he decides to have a second wedding with Marge. And, they kind of say why it is they're together, why it is they're doing this. And I think that's pretty much where the episode ends. Like they have the second marriage. Or no, the episode, no, yeah, they have the second wedding, and then Kirk sings, Can I Borrow a Feeling? Luann leaves, and that's the end of the episode.
Yeah.
Because the Can I Borrow a Feeling music goes into the credits.
God, that song. Ugh.
Can I borrow a feeling? It might be one of the best like intentionally bad songs ever. That is definitely stuck. But what stuck out to you about this episode?
Well, now I always remember that joke, the Woodsy Allen and the
oh yeah, it's funny, I forgot that joke was in this episode, and
I forget that it's this episode, that it's the Luann and Kirk divorce episode. But now I'm thinking, so this was the tie-in to talking about in the previous episode, but that Marge doesn't have friends. She doesn't even have, even if we say that Homer doesn't have deep connections, he still has the buddies that he hangs out with.
Right. And Marge is kind of like a caretaker to the detriment of all else.
Yeah. But here we have she tries to have something that would be like friends and invites all those couples over. None of whom it's not the kind of relationship that she actually I want to say she doesn't really have a relationship with these people,
right?
That she's invited. It seems almost random. Luann and Kirk have to be there because the episode is centered around them and their divorce. But then the other two couples, I can't even remember who they were. It could have been just anybody.
It was Dr. Hibbert and his wife, and then I think Reverend Lovejoy and his wife.
Okay, and Mrs. Lovejoy. Okay, which are great choices, but they could have picked other people. But because Marge doesn't really have a relationship with any of them, or anything resembling friendship.
Yeah, and I think that like it kind of spoke to, and it's funny you point this out, and I think you make a really good point about Marge's relationship to the outside world. I think you developed, when I saw this, so my parents went through a phase, and this was like a big thing around Saratoga when I was probably like early teenager. You'd have kind of all these boomers who sort of isolated themselves when they had children. And so they're trying to socialize again, and they would have these potluck parties with like other parents of children, so the kids could all kind of get shuffled off to the basement and the adults could do whatever. And this felt so close to that. And the thing is, so many of those people had not the greatest marriage, shall we say. Certainly not my parents. And you would have outbursts like this. Like this whole episode felt so close to real life. Like I remember my dad, after him and my mother were, basically over, and he wasn't far from Kirk Van Houten in this episode.
Oh, wow.
He wasn't sleeping in a racing car, but he was not happy with his lot in life. Stuff was not going so hot. And when Homer goes to Lisa and is just like, save my marriage, I had that conversation with my parents so many times. Like, oh my God, both of them.
Really?
Yes. And yeah, they would just kind of vent. And that comes down to that isolation you were talking about. Like, these people at the potlucks are not really their close friends. They don't really have any close friends. And so the issue, like, and I mean, I think if you're a parent of children, you do have a responsibility to have friends that do not have anything to do with you raising your children,
Mhm.
because otherwise, like, your normal emotional needs get dumped onto your children, who are not really qualified to give you any kind of useful response to them, and probably should not be hearing about any of this stuff. Right? Like, I mean, I remember my dad literally complained to me once that my mother hadn't slept with him in 10 years.
That's not just, how old were you?
I was probably like 15 then.
Even then.
Yeah, I mean, but that's
Your own
so much like I can imagine Kirk Van Houten going up to Milhouse and saying that,
Yeah.
right? It
That's,
it all felt so real.
is that in part the one parent trying to turn you against the other parent kind of thing?
I mean, that definitely happened. I was in the episode, they allude to that a little bit, right? Like, Luann is just kind of letting Milhouse like ride his little go-kart around the house and break everything.
Mhm.
She's like, "Have fun, my little angel," or whatever it is. And I think in the case of my parents, neither one of them had like another relationship starting anytime soon.
Uh-huh.
And the thing in front of people, like, you get the sense that Kirk and Luann Van Houten, this isn't the first time they fought in front of people,
Right.
because in a dissolving relationship with those kinds of dynamics, a lot of times the people will have their fights in a public setting because they're looking for external validation in just a very unhealthy way,
Mhm.
right? Like, these people heard my complaints, you didn't hear my complaints. And yeah, that struck me as, and then Homer getting like anxious and then just like overcrowding Marge until she gets like annoyed with it.
Mhm.
I may have done that once or twice in my life. And I think it approaches it like pretty sensitively. Like, you don't feel like they're just like dunking on anybody throughout the episode.
Although, maybe I'm overthinking this, but they bickered a lot. They were really actually nasty to each other in what they said, and then said, "Hey, why don't we get divorced?"
The unrealistic part there is that they got divorced that quickly.
Yeah, that was a pretty quick
People
divorce.
carry that on for like years sometimes.
Mine took 3 years. Getting
Oh
married.
right, yeah. Why am I telling you, like, you actually got divorced?
Yes, I did.
How much does this episode resemble your relationship? Or not your, I mean, I guess you're not your divorce. Or I guess like that might be too personal a question for the podcast,
No,
but
no,
like,
it's fine. We didn't let it spill out in the open in that way. So in fact, people were surprised.
okay.
Yeah, that part didn't hit it home. That part did, the bickering, so not the divorce part, but the bickering in front of everyone without regard to how this might affect other people, and the nastiness, that I'm familiar with, not in my family, but with people I know, and so it might not be about divorce, or it might not lead to divorce, but it's really, really uncomfortable to be in that situation.
Yeah, and I've definitely been in that a few times, and yeah, like, the other thing is just like how easy, because now that I'm seeing this as like an adult who's actually gone through something at least vaguely resembling a divorce,
Mhm.
definitely not a real divorce. Hopefully it'll happen to me someday, and then we'll go back to this episode in another episode, I guess. But I can see both sides of it now. It's, you can, and I think what my parents went through in a weird way was like the standard thing, just like exaggerated to this absurd degree.
Mhm.
Because like my mother had those seizures, and then for those listening, my mother has like a rare brain condition, and she had like a few thousand miniature seizures, and then she never quite acted the same.
Mhm.
Sweet lady, she's doing pretty well now, but for a while it was rough going. And anyway, so my dad kind of wakes up one morning, and she's not really the woman he married in like a more literal way than you'd usually say that phrase, right? Although, I mean, their marriage had not been going well for a while before that. And I mean, I think that is like the point in the relationship where, because it's very hard early in a relationship to imagine like I would be screaming back and forth with this person. Like we would both be like incredibly angry at each other.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's very common. And I think like the moment that happens is sort of like, I don't know if it's you become different people, but it's like you start looking like a different person, maybe, or something like, yeah. And I mean, it's not like we don't really get any other glimpses into Kirk and Luann's marriage in any deep degree.
No, we just know
any other episodes. Yeah. And, we know Kirk is kind of a loser. We know that Milhouse is kind of a weird little kid. But we don't really know a whole lot else about the situation.
No. And in fact, if this underscores how much Marge doesn't know any of these people. If she had known what Kirk and Luann are like, how they air all their dirty laundry, she probably wouldn't have invited them.
Right. And I think it makes the scene, because the first time I saw this, the one scene that stuck out to me is like, this doesn't quite work. Is what is it? Kirk and Homer are sitting on the stoop. Kirk is finally coming to the realization of what he did wrong in the relationship. And Homer's responses to it are kind of like what Dear Abby would say, right? He's like suddenly very mature. And now I get it. It's like he can pull that out if he has to say it, but it's not really how he's living his life. And also Kirk reaching out to somebody he really does not know that well with like very intimate details. I mean, I have people do that with me at the record store at this point. Like people will reach out to sometimes people almost feel more comfortable around strangers because they can present the entire context when they're describing something. And especially with like isolated middle-aged people, they'll kind of like oversharing can be their meet cute, if that makes any sense.
As a meet cute, can you think of any examples?
Well, like Kirk and Homer on the stoop in this episode, they're not really close at any point. Like my dad would have all these random friends where he'd know the guy for like 3 months. Is like, we're besties now or whatever. We're both talking about or like, there's definitely people I got closer to after the big breakup because, they were just other people who wanted to complain about that kind of thing. And it's not the greatest basis for a relationship, but at a certain point, you do start developing these relationships, especially if you're isolated and you're that old. Like, you'll start doing that. You'll start making like inappropriate connections with strangers because you don't really have anybody to talk to that closely. I mean, I've definitely overshared with strangers on plenty of occasions. What was your favorite joke in this episode? Was it the Woodsy Allen joke?
Oh, it's the Woodsy Allen joke. Yeah. So, but I can never remember said. So it's what did she call him? That anxious guy?
That's what I remember the line being, but I'd have to check the DVD again.
And it's not just the way she makes. It's not just the joke itself. It's the way it's presented. It's that as part of her, she wants the sophisticated discussion that she's trying to have. It's so different from it's so forced.
Right, and it's so in character.
Yeah.
So it doesn't feel cheap. Like later seasons of The Simpsons, or like Family Guy a lot of the time, like they will sacrifice character for the sake of what they think is a good gag. Not that Family Guy ever had particularly developed characters in the way that The Simpsons did, but it's just such a well-written joke. Yeah, and also the fact that like it's a Woody Allen joke that aged well. While you have like the stand-in for Bill Cosby sitting at the table, right? Because Dr. Hibbert is supposed to be Bill Cosby on the Cosby Show, right? Like that's not just me imagining that.
Think about that.
Like the guy voicing him is doing a Bill Cosby impression.
I don't know. I don't quite see it or hear it because I'm thinking what's going through my mind is his laugh.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Kind of nervous and inappropriate laugh.
Yeah, I guess it's not like a full on. It's not like how Dr. Frank is obviously supposed to be Jerry Lewis and the Nutty Professor.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I just always presume that Dr. Hibbert is supposed to be like a joke on the Cosby Show, but
I don't know.
I'll have to look that up and see if there was any confirmation either way on that. But anyway, yeah. So you got Bill Cosby and Woody Allen coming up at the same dinner party table, and then you got a divorce. Like, what a dinner party!
Yeah. But yeah, the Woodsy
On the
Allen joke.
Cosby Show, he's a doctor, right?
Yep, Dr. Cliff
Yeah.
Huxtable. Wow, I remember that name.
Well, I mean, that was a huge show for a long time, right? I mean,
Huge. It was the #1 show for I don't know how long.
like 10 years or something.
Yeah, and everybody watched it.
Mm.
But yeah, so that was my favorite joke. What about you? What was your favorite joke? You might need to
I
choose.
I definitely laughed the hardest at the Allied biscuit joke.
Okay.
I don't know. It's like a three-way tie between the race car joke, the Allied biscuit joke, and can I borrow a feeling? In terms, I definitely laughed the most at the Allied biscuit joke. I think the race car joke stuck with me the most. There's just so many great lines in this. I mean, like honestly, this is one of the last like great Simpsons episodes.
It's one of the what? The last great ones. Yeah,
Like
this season 8.
like S tier Simpsons episodes. Like I think the last one after this that I can remember that's on this level almost. I don't know, like Tamaco. I love the Tamaco episode.
Oh,
It's not on this
that.
level though.
Yeah. Although it is a really fun episode.
It is a really fun, and Tamaco is definitely later seasons. Like the only two I remember from like season 11 on, it's the Tamaco episode and the episode where Bart, Milhouse, and Nelson end up in a boy band.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. Oh, but this one, so it's season 8, and you were surprised. You thought it was an earlier season.
I thought it was season 7. I thought that season 8, because season 8 is when they start like abusing their guest star privileges. I feel like, and then, but there's still like this episode. This episode can stand up with any other episode of the show.
Yeah.
I think. Like honestly, like all three of these, like the level of quality. Usually, when you have something this high quality for this long, it doesn't have the high peaks that The Simpsons did. Like Marge versus the Monorail and Milhouse Divided. Like I could probably put those on a top 10 U.S. television episodes ever made list and feel okay about it. Like they're both things that like I think about movies made in the mid 90s, and I can't think of any of those that I've gone back to as many times as I've gone back to like the best episodes of The Simpsons. I mean, and there were some great movies in the middle of the 90s. There's like Safe by Todd Haynes. That's a really good movie. It's not like the movies were just shit in the middle of the 90s. It's you start having television that's as good or better than what's in the movies.
Yeah.
And the other thing is when I watched The Sopranos for the first time, right? Tony Soprano reminded me so much of the early Homer Simpson you were talking about, like the angry, kind of abusive Homer Simpson.
How does he change?
Well, I think The Sopranos is kind of about how he doesn't change.
Oh, okay.
I mean, The Sopranos, like ultimately, The Sopranos is about how nobody really changes. I feel like if you had to boil that show down to one sentence, and he keeps trying to change though. Like I don't, you know what? Okay, like Milhouse Divided, we do see Homer try to make himself into a different person. So Homer tries to change himself, but he can't really.
Right.
The resolution we come to is that we realize that Marge likes him for who he is, for whatever reason. And in The Sopranos, there's definitely a lot of times where like Tony's like, oh, I'm not going to cheat on my wife anymore, and then he inevitably does with some woman that reminds him of his mother. Or he tries to be like charitable or whatever, or like he buys a horse called Pie Oh My, and I want to say season 3, and it seems like he's kind of turning this new leaf because he's just very attached to this horse. We see kind of a sweet Tony Soprano we haven't really seen earlier on.
Okay.
And then Ralphie burns down the barn that Pie Oh My is in. Tony is very pissed off. But there's also an earlier scene where Ralphie beats a stripper to death that reminds Tony of his daughter. And so Tony beats Ralphie to death, like pretty viciously. And we're not sure if it's because of the horse or because of the stripper. But we see ultimately that like his attempts to kind of become a more compassionate person always end up just becoming a pretext for violence and domination. He can't really change.
But so I'm arguing that he does become less angry and more bumbling, or as you put it, the people saying that he gets dumber every
yeah, and that's why I said that like Tony Soprano reminds me of the early Homer Simpson.
Yeah. But we do see a change in Homer. Like he does transform somewhat and is no longer this angry character.
He changes over time in the show, but The Simpsons isn't serialized, so I don't think it means quite the same thing in The Simpsons. Like, I kind of take The Simpsons as Homer is whoever he is at the beginning of this particular episode because he shifts so drastically. Like, if you watch the first season episode and you watch like an episode that came out this year, it's not really the same character even. And so I take it within the context of the episode, like Homer tries to, and there's that one episode where like, what is it? Homer starts teaching that marriage class, like the adult ed marriage class. And then he just starts telling everything about his marriage. And Marge gets like pissed at him for understandably. And what is it? Like, she kicks him out and he's just like wandering around. He's like kind of helpless. And we always know that Homer is basically like a child.
Yeah.
And he's like trying to think like, what is the thing that I can give Marge that no one else can give her? And he comes crawling back to the house. I think he's been kicked out of the house for maybe 5 hours, but he looks like Tom Hanks in Castaway. And he says, I figured it out, Marge. I figured out what I can give you that no one else can give you. Complete and utter dependence. And it's kind of true. And it sort of works because Marge, you get the sense that Marge like had to take care of her siblings when she was younger. Like her mother wasn't around that much because she just kind of obsessively does this stuff. But if there was someone more capable in the house, like my dad and his girlfriend kind of remind me of the Marge Homer dynamic a little bit. Like if there was someone who was more capable of taking care of themselves in that house, Marge would not be able to deal with it because they'd be like encroaching on her space. You know, there's just people like that, you know? So it's sort of like sometimes you kind of think like, what would Marge's life have been if Homer wasn't there? Because I mean, she's smart, she's capable, you know, whatever, but there is some kind of logic to why they're in a marriage. You there, Ron? All right, so this has been a nominee question.
Yeah. No. I'm sorry. I was trying to think. Sorry, I got lost.
No, you just fell asleep.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, listeners. So he just fell asleep for like a few seconds.
Yeah, I started off.
We're not making this up. He does fall asleep for part of the movies. We're not just saying that to get you all excited and hot and bothered or whatever.
And you've now experienced live recorded. That experience.
Anyway, so I guess that's probably a good note to wrap up on.
What was the last thing you said? Because I was trying to think of something and then I fell asleep thinking.
Well, the last thing I said was basically that like you think about sometimes about like, okay, Marge and Homer, would Marge have had a much better life if she hadn't gotten knocked up, right? And ended up with Homer.
Yeah.
Maybe. But at least at the point that we encounter them in the show, there is some kind of underlying dynamic that makes the relationship make sense. It's not entirely just like lady falls for sitcom loser. It's not King of Queens or something like that.
Yeah.
It's not like hot sitcom wife syndrome. There are kind of deep-seated, maybe not healthy psychological needs that both of them have that the other one can fulfill. And that was my point.
Can we say codependent?
Maybe. They don't seem like there's not a whole lot of them being like super needy around each other. Like I don't think that
okay.
Marge is ever super needy around Homer.
Okay.
Maybe I guess codependent implies that both of them rely on each other when I think Homer really just relies on Marge. But Marge needs him to rely on her.
Right. I think Marge needs that.
Right, like Homer gives her purpose because otherwise she just would seem kind of neurotic. If she didn't have this like guy making messes all the time to clean up.
I just remembered a joke from one of the episodes, and I forget what's going on with Marge exactly, but you see her drinking a glass of wine. It's like, oh no, it made it seem like Marge is starting to develop an alcohol problem. And then it goes to she tells someone like, yeah, I only had one glass of wine today. You're supposed to have two for health, for
right. Well, there's those episodes where it turns out she has like a gambling addiction. Like they go to a casino and she just can't stop gambling.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure what that had to do with that, but I guess that's the closest we get to like dysfunctional behavior for Marge.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think the kind of stuff that she puts up with from Homer is a little there's some dysfunction there.
Yeah.
But she needs it, and so he's fulfilling her needs.
And it feels like a real family. Like they're not role models. They're just kind of mirroring more what an actual family looks like versus what you see on a lot of sitcoms.
It's interesting how much we've talked about Marge, because I know if I've had conversations about The Simpsons in the past, or when I've had them, they've been about Homer and Bart, and to a lesser degree Lisa. Never about Marge.
But I feel like Marge is at the center of a lot of the best episodes of the show. You have the one where she joins what is a Streetcar Named Marge, where she joins the theater group and she's in that production of A Streetcar Named Desire with Flanders.
Oh yeah.
And you get to see Flanders doing Marlon Brando, and it's just fucking hilarious. There's a lot of great Marge episodes, and I mean I think Marge is Homer's a lot flashier, but there's not really. I mean, the weakest member of the main cast, I guess, I would say is Maggie, just because there's no real way to develop her unless you have a timeline. But at the same time, like they know that they're not like insisting on writing a Maggie plot into every episode. Just when they have a good Maggie idea, they do it.
Yeah.
And they even joke about there's one episode where Homer's like, our two children, and then Marge is like, aren't you forgetting one? And he's like, I don't think so. And then I guess the other thing is that they're not supposed to be like well off, right? Like having a house like that now for a family would be unbelievably difficult on a single income.
Yeah, that's true. In the real world, Marge would be working as well.
Right. Like maybe the late 80s was the last point where you could still get away with that. But yeah, like I mean, honestly, a lot of the couples I've known over the since I've been an adult, and certainly I was in this situation, like where you're living, basically like breaking up with somebody isn't just breaking up with somebody. Breaking up with somebody is like a housing crisis.
Okay.
Right. Like I could not have afforded to stay in Boston on my own, even in like a bedroom and like with 5 roommates.
Right.
And so, yeah, although you can't really update The Simpsons to reflect that, right? Like that's just sort of like a thing the later writers have to deal with. I mean, you can't get rid of the house. Like the house is iconic.
No, and they just we're describing something that what it's like in the real world. This is at the end of the day a cartoon world, and they need them to be not that well off, but they need them to have their house. The house often like plays a significant role, or sometimes.
I saw this YouTube video where this guy's talking about like what is the actual layout of the Simpsons house. And I always thought it was pretty straightforward, right? You have like dining room leads into kitchen. On the other side, the dining room leads into the hallway with the stairs and the living room. And then up the stairs, Bart has the far room. Lisa has the room closer to the stairs. I'm not entirely sure where Maggie actually sleeps. But there's like a bunch of rooms that they'll mention being in the house once and then forget about. Or like there's one episode where they just have a basement, right? Because like I don't remember them ever having a basement.
I don't remember.
That's very interesting. That's like we're boiling the cotton at the top of the bottle, I think, at this point. Ron looks about ready to fall asleep again.
I am. That's
Executive decision. We're gonna sign out.
right.
What's the sign out, Ron?
The sign out.
Yeah.
You're Dan. You're still Dan.
You're still Ron.
And this is
still
a nominee questionable movies. Oh my god, I pronounced the whole thing on the first try. Wait.
Yeah, and you can't stop this trade.
No, I have such a hard time pronouncing the Q word. So.
Like this is a monorail with no brakes.
Monorail.
Monorail.
All right.
All right. Later, peeps.
Take care, everyone.